Imagine this: a mind sharp as a diamond's edge, capable of dissecting complex theories, weaving intricate narratives, and envisioning futures others can barely conceive. This mind, you might assume, would be at the epicenter of vibrant social circles, lauded for its insights, its wit, its boundless curiosity. You'd picture it in lively debates, surrounded by admirers, perpetually engaged in the rich tapestry of human connection. After all, isn't intelligence meant to unlock doors, to forge deeper bonds, to make one more desirable in the grand social marketplace? Yet, you look around, and what do you often find? The most profoundly intelligent individuals, the thinkers, the innovators, the artists who truly push the boundaries of human understanding, are frequently the ones standing at the periphery. They are the quiet observers, the solitary walkers, the ones whose calendars aren't brimming with social engagements, but rather with long hours of focused work, deep reading, or silent contemplation. Their social lives, by conventional metrics, often appear sparse, almost deliberately so. This is the unsettling paradox that gnaws at the edges of our collective consciousness, a truth whispered but rarely confronted directly. Why do smart people so often abandon the very social rituals that seem to sustain everyone else? Why does the pursuit of profound understanding so frequently correlate with a retreat from conventional sociality? It's a question that defies our most cherished assumptions about human nature and the inherent value of connection. We're taught, from childhood, that man is a social animal, that belonging is paramount, that isolation is a curse. But what if, for a select few, isolation isn't a curse, but a prerequisite? What if it's not a failing, but a deliberate choice, born from a brutal, almost uncomfortable clarity? Consider the sheer effort involved in navigating the social labyrinth. The small talk, the unspoken rules, the performance of personality, the constant calibration of one's authentic self against the expectations of the group. For many, this is the very fabric of life, a comforting ritual. But for the mind attuned to deeper currents, to the underlying absurdities and superficialities, this can feel less like connection and more like an exhausting, low-fidelity distraction. Is it possible that the bandwidth required for true intellectual pursuit leaves little room, or indeed, little desire, for the pleasant but often shallow exchanges that dominate social interactions? Think of the energy expended in feigning interest, in nodding along to conversations that skim the surface, in participating in rituals that feel hollow. For a mind wired for depth, this isn't just tiresome, it's a profound drain. It's like asking a concert pianist to spend their days playing chopsticks. They can do it, but the soul starves. Is it not an act of self-preservation, then, for such individuals to conserve their precious mental and emotional resources for pursuits that truly ignite their spirit, even if those pursuits lead them away from the clamor of the crowd? This isn't about arrogance, though it can often be mistaken for it. It's something far more fundamental, more primal. It's about a difference in vibrational frequency, an internal hum that doesn't quite sync with the general chorus. It's about a gaze that sees through the polite fictions, the comforting illusions, the convenient narratives that bind society together. And once you see through them, once you've glimpsed the gears and cogs beneath the polished facade, how do you comfortably re-engage with the illusion? How do you pretend the emperor is fully clothed when you've seen him in his naked vulnerability? The tension builds within us when we confront this question, doesn't it? It challenges our ingrained beliefs about happiness, success, and belonging. It forces us to ask, is there a harsh truth embedded in the very nature of profound intellect that pushes one towards a peculiar, almost inevitable solitude? A truth that Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of pessimism, articulated with a chilling precision, suggesting that our deepest misery often comes not from solitude, but from the unbearable burden of others. And if he was right, What does that imply about the nature of human connection itself and the price paid for genuine understanding? This is just the beginning of our journey into that uncomfortable truth. A truth that, once seen, cannot be unseen. The paradox we just confronted, the brilliant mind's retreat from the social sphere, is not a modern phenomenon or a quirky personality trait. It is, as Arthur Schopenhauer contended, a fundamental consequence of the human condition, a harsh truth buried beneath layers of social expectation. Schopenhauer, the master of philosophical despair, observed that the fundamental driving force of human existence is the will, a blind, restless, aimless striving for life. And where does the individual with profound intellectual capacity find themselves in relation to this will? At odds with it. The very mechanism that allows for intellectual depth, the capacity for deep reflection and critical analysis, is what inoculates the intelligent person against the social opium that pacifies the masses. Schopenhauer argued that the common person, driven almost entirely by the will, seeks constant external distraction to avoid the terrifying emptiness of their own inner world. They need the noise of society, the gossip, the games, the collective striving for ephemeral goals, because to be truly alone is to be confronted with the futility of their own desires and the ultimate meaninglessness of their existence. This need for distraction manifests as the relentless pursuit of social engagement. For the person whose intellect, what Schopenhauer called the intellect as the spectator, has achieved a degree of separation from the blind will, solitude becomes something else entirely. It is not an emptiness to be avoided, but a fertile space to be embraced. When they step into the social arena, they do not find the distraction they need, but the very things they sought to escape. The predictable nature of human vanity, the ceaseless chatter of the superficial, the fixation on status and material possessions. Schopenhauer's diagnosis was ruthless. A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free. The social contract, he implies, is a contract of mutual enslavement to mediocrity. This philosophical root is echoed decades later by the psychological insights of Carl Jung. Jung's work on introversion and extroversion offers a parallel framework. The extrovert is energized and oriented by the objective world, people, objects, action. But the introvert, and the deeply intellectual mind often leans heavily into introverted intuition and thinking, is oriented by the subjective inner world. Their energy flows from within. Their reality is processed through a complex internal filter. When the intellectual introvert engages socially, they are effectively turning their energy outward to navigate a world structured by extroverted rules. This is not simply a preference, it is a psychological tax. The social interaction becomes an expenditure, often leading to what is now recognized as social fatigue, not because they dislike people, but because the effort required to align their deep internal reality with the shallow external performance is immense. Their mind is searching for a connection to the noumenal, the essence of things, while the social setting is preoccupied with the phenomenal, the surface appearance. Furthermore, intellect brings an inevitable burden, acute perception. As Friedrich Nietzsche suggested, to look too deeply into the abyss is to risk the abyss looking back into you. The truly perceptive person is acutely aware of the subtext, the microaggressions, the subtle manipulations, the emotional compromises, and the pervasive fear that underscore many social exchanges. They see the flaws not just in others, but in the social institutions themselves. This heightened awareness turns what is a comforting game for others into a painful, transparent charade for them. It is this clarity of vision that constitutes the hidden problem. The intelligent person struggles with the societal tendency toward cognitive dissonance and willful blindness. They find it nearly impossible to suspend their critical faculties simply to make others comfortable or to maintain a pleasant illusion. They are unwilling to trade truth for harmony. And when one consistently refuses to participate in the collective fictions, the collective, in self-defense, pushes them out. Consider the depth of conversation. The smart person craves the exchange of raw ideas, the wrestling with complexity, the honest exploration of existential concerns. Most social gatherings, however, are built on the principle of social lubrication, lightness, ease, and the avoidance of all topics that might introduce friction or existential doubt. When the deeply intelligent mind attempts to inject genuine depth into these superficial settings, the response is often a polite withdrawal, an awkward silence, or a quick change of topic. They are effectively penalized for bringing a diamond-cutting tool to a sandbox. The retreat, then, is a form of intellectual self-care, a necessary act of withdrawal to protect the integrity of one's inner world from the constant compromise demanded by the external one. It is not misanthropy. It is a profound commitment to truth and depth, even if the cost is the warmth of conventional companionship. But what are the true, long-term consequences of this necessary, yet potentially isolating, choice? If this solitude is the price of freedom and intellectual pursuit, how does it quietly reshape the individual and the society they have quietly turned their back on? The silence of the solitary thinker is not empty. It is pregnant with unseen forces that shape both their personal reality and, in time, the future of the world. If the intellectual retreat is, as we've established, a necessary act of self-preservation, a move to shield the mind from the corrosive superficiality of the will-driven masses, then what are the unspoken, insidious tolls it exacts, both on the solitary individual and on the society they've left behind? The consequences are not loud and dramatic. They are silent, deep, and viral, shaping reality in ways few ever recognize. The first unseen consequence is the silent solidification of the intellectual's gilded cage. You, the deep thinker, believe you are gaining efficiency by eschewing the vacuous social rituals. You've replaced small talk with Newton, gossip with Kant, and the fleeting drum of acquaintance with the enduring truth of the cosmos. On paper, you are optimizing for wisdom. But psychologically, you are becoming a prisoner of your own clarity. In isolation, you are increasingly vulnerable to the darkest of all cognitive pitfalls, the solipsistic echo chamber. Your brilliant mind, lacking the constant, unpredictable friction of genuinely diverse human input, begins to operate without a necessary check. You find yourself retreating into a perfect intellectual world of your own construction, where your premises are always validated, your conclusions always elegant, and your worldview remains perpetually unthreatened. The people you avoid, the ones you deemed shallow, are, paradoxically, the very source of the messy, illogical, and often irritating data that keeps an intellect honest and pliable. Neurologically, this withdrawal can lead to a kind of brittleness of mind. The human brain, after all, evolved as a deeply social organ, and the capacity for theory of mind, the ability to model the perspectives, intentions, and emotional states of others, is honed not through reading philosophical texts, but through the high-stakes, real-time chaos of social negotiation. When you opt out of that, you stop exercising your emotional agility. Your logical engine may be running at peak performance, but your ability to translate that logic into actionable wisdom in the real world, the world populated by imperfect, irrational beings, begins to atrophy. You can solve complex differential equations, but you lose the intuitive calculus of human motivation. The irony is staggering. By trying to optimize for truth, you lose a critical facet of truth itself, the chaotic, irrational element of humanity. Your mind becomes an exquisite, highly polished instrument, designed only to play a solo incapable of joining the full, complex orchestra of life. Now, consider the societal implication, a consequence far more terrifying. This mass retreat of acute minds creates an intellectual brain drain in the public sphere. When the most insightful, most critically minded individuals choose silence and solitude, they create an immense intellectual void in the places where decisions are actually made, in governance, in corporate leadership, in public discourse, and in community organization. This void is instantly and inevitably filled by those who are excellent at what the intellectual disdains: social fitness. The social winners, the charismatic, the agreeable, the ones adept at performing sincerity and forging networks, rise to the top. They may not possess the intellectual depth to understand the systemic implications of their decisions, but they possess the essential skill of group consensus management. The result is the triumph of triviality as policy. Complex, nuanced problems, like climate change, systemic inequality, or the pitfalls of advanced technology, are presented and addressed through the lens of emotional appeals, simple narratives, and easily digestible sound bites. The intellectual, watching from the isolated tower, sees the horrifying simplification and retreats further, saying, "See, I told you they were too shallow." This confirmation bias deepens the cycle. The world gets shallower because the deep thinkers left, and the deep thinkers leave because the world is shallow. This is the cultural conditioning at its most insidious. Society has developed a convenient myth, the myth of the hermit genius, that justifies this brain drain. We are taught to romanticize the image of the solitary inventor, the starving artist, the eccentric mathematician who shuns the world. This myth serves as a societal anesthetic, allowing the majority to feel comfortable with their own mediocrity and justifying the intellectual's withdrawal as an inevitable, even necessary, prerequisite for genius. But this is a cultural trap, persuading the next generation of potential leaders in thought that their highest duty is to the shelf of books, not to the town square. The true urgency is this: the quality of human civilization is a function of the quality of its thinking. When those capable of the deepest, most complex thought remove themselves from the field of play, the entire game devolves. You are not just sacrificing your social life. You are participating in the quiet, unacknowledged process of collective intellectual disarmament. The solitude that began as an act of courageous independence risks becoming an act of profound, if unintentional, societal neglect. You are standing on a precipice. Your powerful mind has granted you the freedom to see the trap, but your current solution, withdrawal, has led you into a different, equally dangerous trap: the brittle, isolated echo chamber. The problem is not the shallowness of others, but the assumption that you can solve a human problem without engaging with humans. The truth is, the mind that can see the whole system is the only mind that can fix it, but not from the sidelines. The moment demands a radical and terrifying reversal. If the retreat was an act of self-preservation, the next step must be an act of rebellion. It must be a counterintuitive move that challenges everything Schopenhauer seemed to endorse. It requires a breakthrough realization that the very skills you developed in solitude must now be deployed in the world, but with an entirely new psychological operating system. This is where the true fight for intellectual integrity begins. We have established the terrifying trap. The brilliant mind retreats into solitude to escape shallowness, only to create its own, far more subtle trap: the brittle echo chamber. The question now is not merely how to socialize, but how to re-engage with the world without compromising the hard-won integrity and clarity of vision that solitude afforded. The solution is counterintuitive, a radical shift in perspective that requires not a lowering of your standards, but an elevation of your strategic intention. The core of the rebellion is to cease viewing social interaction as a mandatory ritual and to start viewing it as a deliberate act of intellectual sovereignty. You are not there to belong. You are there to observe, influence, and gather data. The principle of the strategic observer. The first step in breaking free is rejecting the binary choice, either total immersion or total isolation. Instead, adopt the mindset of the strategic observer. You must understand that the problem with most social life is not the people, but the default mode of engagement, a passive acceptance of superficiality. The philosopher of the will, Schopenhauer, gave us the problem, but we must look to those who mastered action in the face of philosophical despair, like Viktor Frankl. Frankl, who endured the ultimate existential crisis, found that freedom lay in the last of the human freedoms, the ability to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Your choice, the radical shift, is to treat the social world as a live laboratory for your intellect. Instead of dreading small talk, view it as an opportunity to practice deep listening and to map the psychological terrain of the common person, the very terrain you seek to understand and, perhaps, help shape. Stop listening for information and start listening for motivation. What are their core fears? What narratives are they clinging to? What are the unspoken assumptions that drive their actions? This transforms the mundane conversation from a burden into a powerful, real-time research session. You are no longer wasting time. You are collecting the messy, illogical data that will make your intellectual models of the world more robust. Reclaiming the conversation from triviality. The intellectual's typical mistake is trying to force depth into a shallow setting, often resulting in alienation. The true rebellion is not forcing your perspective, but creating the space for depth to emerge. This is the subtle art of the Socratic approach, adapted for the modern context. Instead of pontificating on your complex idea, ask simple, yet high-leverage questions. A truly smart person doesn't demonstrate their intelligence by telling people what they know. They demonstrate it by asking questions that reveal something about the other person's soul or challenge a comfortable assumption without becoming antagonistic. Instead of, I believe the current macroeconomic model is fundamentally flawed because it ignores the externalities of environmental degradation. Too complex, too likely to shut down conversation. Try, what is one thing about your job that you feel is fundamentally misunderstood by everyone else? Or, if you had to bet everything on one massive change happening in the next 10 years, what would it be? These questions create an opportunity for honest vulnerability and intellectual engagement that rises above the weather and gossip. You are not trying to change everyone's mind. You are looking for the few who are also quietly waiting for a deeper conversation, thus selecting your own company in real time. The power of limited, high-quality engagement. The final crucial element of the rebellion is understanding and practicing intellectual minimalism. You do not need to attend every function, and you certainly do not need to be on all the time. Your solitude is still sacred, a necessary resource for the intellectual life. The rebellion is about making your presence count when you do choose to engage. Historians often point to figures like Leonardo da Vinci or Goethe. These men were certainly capable of profound solitude, yet they strategically placed themselves at the centers of cultural power and intellectual exchange. They understood that genius needs friction and a sounding board. Your new social blueprint should prioritize rare, targeted, and intense interactions over frequent, shallow ones. Schedule time for solitude, fiercely protect it, and then allocate a fixed, limited amount of time for high-value social engagements. Treat your time as your most valuable asset. When you step out, do so with a clear, almost mercenary purpose: to test an idea, to recruit an ally, or to force a necessary perspective into a sphere that desperately lacks it. This is how you break the cycle. You stop reacting to the world's shallowness with retreat and start responding with strategic intrusion. You use the depth cultivated in solitude as your weapon for engagement. You are not abandoning social life. You are radically redefining what a social life means for the intelligent person. It is not a place for comfort or belonging. It is a theater of operation where you deploy your greatest strength, your mind, to observe and subtly, yet powerfully, reshape the human narrative. This shift transforms the loneliness of the hermit into the self-possession of the revolutionary. But to fully execute this revolution, we need the final, deepest truth. The ultimate realization that redefines the very relationship between the inner world of the thinker and the outer world of action. We have journeyed from the paradox of the solitary genius through Schopenhauer's harsh diagnosis, the psychological traps of isolation, and finally to the strategy of intellectual rebellion. Now, we arrive at the ultimate, most profound realization, the insight that redefines the very purpose of profound intellect and resolves the tension between the inner life and the social world. The final truth is this: the most intelligent person is not the one who avoids suffering, but the one who suffers most productively. The core error that leads smart people to abandon social life is the belief that they are seeking to maximize personal comfort or intellectual purity. They view the world as an obstacle to their thought, and people as sources of unnecessary pain or distraction. This is a subtle form of intellectual hedonism, the desire for a world that perfectly aligns with their critical, rational framework. But the real power of the intellect lies not in its capacity to construct flawless, isolated theories, but in its ability to grapple with fundamental resistance. The universe, and especially the human element of it, is messy, illogical, and fundamentally resistant to elegant categorization. This resistance, this friction, this suffering caused by observing the colossal gap between the possible and the actual, is not a sign of failure. It is the raw material of genuine wisdom. The paradox of empathy and intelligence. The ultimate realization is the redemption of empathy through analytical rigor. Your intellect allows you to see the gears and cogs beneath the surface. You see the causes of human irrationality. The superficial person judges the effect, the irritating behavior. The truly intelligent person analyzes the source, the fear, the cultural conditioning, the unconscious will driving the action. When you see a person behaving irrationally, the shallow mind registers annoyance. The deep mind should register. This is a predictable outcome of a particular emotional wound, cognitive bias, or societal pressure. This is the highest form of intellectual mastery, analytical empathy. It is the ability to understand why the individual is trapped in their superficiality, and in doing so, you dissolve the judgmental alienation that forced your retreat in the first place. This is the paradigm shift. The purpose of intellectual solitude is not to create a sanctuary from the world, but to forge the tools required to understand and heal its suffering. The Schopenhauerian flip Schopenhauer's truth, that life is suffering and the most intelligent see it most clearly, can be flipped from a source of paralysis into a call to action. If the world is driven by a blind, striving will that causes endless pain, then the highest function of the intellect is to become a counterforce to that will. The mind capable of seeing the whole system, the same mind that finds the shallowness unbearable, is the only mind equipped to create the pathways for genuine escape from the will's tyranny. This means your insights must be translated from the solitude of your mind to the reality of human behavior. You are not a spectator. You are a necessary participant, because the only person qualified to lead the herd out of the abyss is the one who can see the abyss most clearly. Your ultimate purpose is to serve as the architect of insight for others. This requires moving from abstract truth to applied wisdom. You must learn to translate your complex, nuanced understanding into digestible, compelling forms that can penetrate the resistance of the common will. This is why many of the greatest philosophers, scientists, and revolutionaries, from Marcus Aurelius to Galileo to Martin Luther King Jr., did not remain hermits. They knew the ultimate test of their truth was its efficacy in the chaotic social world. The ultimate truth, therefore, is not the discovery of solitude, the first stage, but the mastery of engagement, The final stage. The loneliness of the brilliant is not a badge of superiority, but a temporary, necessary forge. When you feel the familiar urge to retreat from social friction, remember this final realization. That moment of irritation or fatigue is the most valuable data point you have. It is the real-world evidence of where humanity is struggling, where the illusion is strongest, and where your specific, hard-won clarity is most desperately needed. You are not too smart for the world. You are the one person capable of seeing the world for what it truly is. To abandon the social life is to abandon the proving ground of your intellect. The true genius uses the chaos of human interaction not as a burden to be avoided, but as the essential, dynamic material out of which a better reality must be sculpted. Go back to the world, not as a seeker of connection, but as an agent of clarity. This is your rebellion. This is your truth. This is the profound duty that comes with the terrifying gift of sight.